Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Verite Research, I'd like to welcome you all to our forum on improving national budget practices, solutions for a professional government. Public finance and public administration are at the heart of a country's development. This is what motivated us to organize this forum today. Countries with strong, transparent, and accountable public finance management systems are able to deliver services more effectively and equitably to its citizens. For many countries, poor public finance management systems are a key constraint that prevent them from converting high-level policy ambitions to real-life outcomes. Sri Lanka historically has a poor track record of public finance management. The numbers running next to me on the screen are evidence of this. If the country is to achieve the higher levels of development outcomes it envisions, overcoming its public finance challenges remains critical. Today, it is against this context that we will share with you some key insights from Verite's work on public finance. Today's program will feature two presentations. Our first presentation will feature key insights and recommendations for improving Sri Lanka's budget implementation through better budget formulation and better budget oversight. Our second presentation will feature findings from our research on ministerial portfolios. This shows how the splitting and combining of ministries in Sri Lanka affects the efficient and effective functioning of government. Both presentations will be followed by a brief Q&A session. Without further ado, I call upon our Executive Director, Dr. Nishanti Mel, to make the first presentation.
Thank you very much, Tasha. And let me thank all of you, members of Parliament, officials from the Ministry of Finance and other government departments, dignitaries from diplomatic agencies, professionals, and many people who have done research and thought about solutions to Sri Lanka's problems in finance and economics, for your presence here and for taking the time. I just want to position the attitude or the posture with which we are coming here today. I think there are many people who find Verite difficult to deal with because what we say may be contesting or critiquing what is popularly understood today. There's a fact check that's running in the front of the Daily Mirror that says the president's claim about disability is false. I'm getting a lot of hate messages from different people, including academics who say you have undermined the championing of greater interest in disability in the country, and others, of course, who are unhappy that the president has been criticized. The point is not to be critical of the president or to undermine interest in disability. The point is to say that we need to be more professional in the way we look at data, analyze data, and come to conclusions. If we have the wrong analysis, if we have the wrong understanding of the problem, if we have poor ways of planning around information and data, we're going to get poor outcomes. And that is one of the significant issues that Sri Lanka has to solve. I think we are glad that the current president and therefore the government has put professionalism at the heart of their campaign and at the heart of their promise for change in the country. Because professionalism and the importance of advancing professionalism is really what this discussion is also about. And this is why we say solutions for national budget practices for a professional government. And I think while what we say, I don't want it to be misunderstood by anybody in the government and ministries, is not a personal criticism of anyone. It is really a critical understanding of the systemic problems that we have, which we must be committed to solve if we are to form a professional government, without which Sri Lanka's ambitions of growing as a middle-income country, becoming a more prosperous and successful country, I think is significantly undermined. So let me begin. We are keeping this very tight, and we're going to move quite quickly because we have 2 presentations and 2 Q&As in between. The second part is not just about budgeting, but also about setting up cabinet portfolios, how to design government overall in a way that lends itself to being more professional. Let me start with budget. We have titled it Improving or Solutions for National Budget Practices for a Professional Government. And I'm going to cover 4 areas for you. I'm going to first talk about the problems we have in implementing a budget, or the problems that we see. And then talk about how those problems are connected to formulation and controls that exist in a systematic way, and then talk about solutions. I want to really also emphasize the solutions, because this is not just about a blame game or pointing fingers or telling people why things are not going well. It is also about thinking constructively and practically about how we solve problems and how we take simple practical steps to move forward. My discussion on implementation will talk about 2 things: poor delivery, that is failing to meet expectations that are set. Mismanagement is really that we often also do the unexpected. It's not that we just don't do what is expected. And both these are problems in terms of budgeting. Very simply, take a look at this graph that talks about how budget outcomes deviate from revenue targets that are presented, and this is going up to 2009, but we can go back further. What you see is that every single year, the revenue outcome is lower than the revenue projections that are presented and approved in Parliament. Now, it's impossible to get a revenue projection perfectly right. There are too many unknowns in doing that. But if one is attempting to project revenue in a statistically competent way, then your errors will be around the mean. Sometimes you will make a guess that's too low, sometimes you will make a guess that's too high. What is clear in these revenue projections is that they're consistently optimistic or over-optimistic. So the one thing, if you're a betting man, the one thing you can bet for sure and win is to say government will not meet its revenue targets. You have the best odds in walking away, making a lot of money, if that is the bet that you're making. Because, and you know, sometimes they are underperforming by a very large margin. So 2014 by 18%, 2009 by 18%, 2018 by 18%. So you may also observe certain cycles here. That is closer to elections, you tend to fail more in terms of meeting expectations. So we say budgets have boom and bust cycles. And so another way that there's too much, in fact, political influence in professional management of a budget, because, you know, in the cusp of election years, the problem seems to get worse. Let me just show you, it's not just revenue targets that are presented in the budget that we fail to meet any kind of long-term expectations that we set. So this is, again, the revenue targets are often given. A budget is not simply a recommendation to Parliament for what we will do this year. It's also based on a medium term or a 2, 3, 4, 5-year outlook. And what we see here is that Sri Lanka's budgeting process is a person who's always promising to go on diet tomorrow or to study for exams tomorrow. Because by saying, well, tomorrow will be better, or I will do better tomorrow, you license yourself to do worse today. But you say, that's okay, because in the next few years, we are going to be right. So what you see here is the projections. The first red lines are projections in 2010. Then the gray lines are projections given in 2013. Then the next ones are projections in 2017, 19, and so forth. But the outcome is the solid line that passes through. The outcome is O is less than every projection. So it's always promising to do better tomorrow, but never really doing better tomorrow, and then revisiting the promise to adjust for that failure that you have not done better. For instance, in 2010, we predicted that revenue in 2013 would be 17%. Actually, it was 14%. Even though the future is always optimistic, actually now it's fallen to 13.4%. And after the tax cuts, it's likely to be even less. So not even the optimistic view we had for 2013 is achieved, actually hugely underachieved, all the way in 2019 as well. Likewise, we can look at the projection on debt targets. These also underperform all the time. There was expectation that by 2015, Sri Lanka's debt would be down to 65%. In fact, in 2015, it ended up being close to 80%. And today it is going up even more than 80%. Now, failure to meet, setting over-optimistic revenue targets, which seems to be systematic, which leads then also to larger deficits, which leads to larger amount of debt, which then becomes the follow-on consequence, also leads to letting down people in terms of outcomes that you can deliver through expenditure, because when revenue falls, expenditure also has to be cut to manage that. So this is how much you underperform in expenditure on welfare compared to what you promised in the budget. So you can see the underperformance is 4, 5, sometimes 12%, sometimes 8%. But in election years or around election years, you tend to overperform. So once again, the cycles that actually it's more political interest rather than professional interest that might be driving the budget. This is in agriculture. Now, every government pays lip service to the importance of the farmer and the importance of agriculture, and budgets reflect ambitious promises to farmers and agriculture. And you see how, except in 2015, every single year since 2019, expenditure has been significantly less, sometimes even 40% less on agriculture than what is promised. So you see the cascading consequence of over-optimistic revenue targets, then political cycles also interfering with the way in which expenditure is determined, and then the consequences on debt and the consequences on welfare. This is likewise for education, where in 2016 we spent 30% less than promised. This is a way in which systematically the budget loses credibility, because if you can't expect the government to implement what is presented to Parliament, there is a real credibility problem. The credibility problem comes in other ways, that is that you also do what is unexpected. So actually what the budget says, and often the media, the government, the country focuses on these great budget proposals that are announced. They account only for about 5% of the budget sometimes, but there are hundreds of proposals, and these are what captures people's attention. However, let me tell you about a very interesting little device that Sri Lanka has put in its budget since about 2002. It's called the Discretionary Budget. That's the term the Committee on Public Finance has used for it, because there's a piece of legislation or regulation that was introduced, I think, around 2002. So for many years we managed without this, but says that money allocated to the Development Activities Program may be transferred to any other program under any other head by order of the Secretary to the Treasury, or order either of the Deputy Secretary, Director of National Budget, or any of them that are empowered by the Secretary Treasury. So development activities sounds like a very promising thing in which to park financing and budget. And this can be announced in a very promising way. However, you notice that what is parked there is very easily moved without parliamentary approval. So there was a court case, I think some people here are involved in, that has forced the government to then bring it to Parliament later on. But that is where Parliament is invited to close the stable door after the horse has bolted. And you can see how the misuse of this discretionary budget has increased over time, 2015 being the worst on record. and the red is for the capital, the gray is for the recurrent expenditure. So, in the early days, it was used discriminatingly, but increasingly it was used with less discrimination. The Committee on Public Finance a couple of years ago asked the Ministry of Finance, questioned the Ministry of Finance on this, and asked to cap the percentage of the budget parked under this line item to 2%, and that has helped to bring it down in 2019. But that is just an oversight function. This is not. There is no circumscription by law in how this head is used. So consequently, the budget proposals are very poorly implemented. Even those proposals that are advertised and talked about in the media, this is 2017 on your left, 2018 on your right, and you can see that the percentage that is implemented was 16% and 26% fully implemented in 17 and 18. That's a very small percentage. It was a substantial implementation for 11% and 21%. You can also see that a large quantity of proposals, the implementation status is undisclosed. So what we see is after 2017, when this was first done, the government thought it fit not to disclose information, perhaps of those things that were not progressing too well. So concealing information, or the ability to conceal information, can also license the permission to not do as well as you need to do, and that's something to look at. Why is implementation weak? Well, we want to talk about the problems of formulation. So implementation is weak, I think, for not only for the lack of consistent systematic application on how to implement, but because there are weaknesses in the way the proposals are formulated themselves. And once you've formulated, the formulation is weak, that can lead to weaker implementation. In formulation, I think we need to think about having sufficient research and analysis that formulates a proposal. Having feasibility studies that determine whether the proposal is actually doable. I'm not going to get into examples because many people in the room know how many proposals have been advertised in the budget and later not implemented because they were seen as not feasible. We also need risk and scenario analysis because the world is uncertain. Sri Lanka is a small country. Things can impact us in a way that we don't have to wait for the shock to come like we do in disaster management and floods. We wait for the flood and then we decide how to rescue people. We really need a plan of what we're going to do before the flood happens, before the disaster hits, and that's what you call scenario and risk analysis. Take a look at this very intriguing information where in formulation stage, these were the numbers in red lines when the Ministry of Finance projected tax revenue in a certain way to the Committee on Public Finance. Now the Committee on Public Finance, which is a parliamentary committee, looked at it, used all sorts of people they might have access to, and some of them are in the room. And those outsiders looking at this said this is not really feasible. These revenue targets don't make sense. And the committee was so impressed by the problem that they, in fact, in their parliamentary paper, you can go and read it, said, no, we think that you should revise your estimates downwards. It was never done. And so the gray lines are the committee's recommendations of revising estimates downwards. Of course, the committee was conservative. Even if they thought it's going to be much less, they revised conservative estimates. You can see that in all of these, and these are not all, the committee's estimates were much, much closer to the reality that came all out than what was approved in Parliament. There were actually about 20 tax revenue lines, and the committee made comments on 13. What was amazing is that almost all of them, the committee turned out to have had a better set of projections. And I think the ministry is in a hard place, or ministry officials are in a hard place, because sometimes political interests force them to provide optimistic or rosy pictures. And so they have to make the deficit targets work. They have to make the promises to IMF look credible. And so overestimating tax collection is an easy way to do that, but of course it means we're ill prepared to what happens when reality hits. One of the devices of overestimation, oddly enough, turned out to be interest payments on foreign loans. Now, this is one area in which we have a schedule of loans, schedule of interest payments. The stock of interest doesn't change much in any particular year. It should be pretty straightforward to calculate what your interest outlay is going to be in a year. And yet what we noticed looking 5 years back, from 2012 onwards when we did the analysis to 2017, that actual interest payments exceeded the projected interest payments by 43% on average. So that's, now this is a formulation problem, right? This is not an external shock, this is not an unforeseen circumstance. It is that in formulation, there is a serious issue in the credibility of numbers that come to Parliament. I think there are people in this room that when we saw these numbers, we didn't believe it. We had to do the math many times and convince ourselves that this is what really happened. Now, the Ministry of Finance has a department of project monitoring and management and monitoring. This is from their own report. So I think the Ministry of Finance understands the problem also. And these are the delays in the implementation of projects. I said lack of feasibility, lack of analysis leads to delays. So 0 to 6 months, 33 projects. 7 to 12 months, that means almost a year, 88 projects. 8 projects required more than 6 additional years to get implemented. This is the DPM reporting. And really, it is a basic wake-up call that without realistic planning, we're not just fooling society and the Sri Lankan population, we're fooling ourselves. Many of us and you sit on boards of private companies who would never tolerate failures of implementation of this nature. We would never tolerate budget deviations at this level. And yet, for a whole country, we seem to have the ability to end up in outcomes that would seem like a very amateurish way of governing or managing public finance. So I think we wanted to talk about scenario analysis. Minimally having an optimistic scenario, a medium scenario, a pessimistic scenario, and all these are the variations we have here are variations that actually happened. Sometimes we thought nominal GDP will grow at 10, it's grown more. Sometimes it's never grown more. But we projected 10, 12, it's come to 8. And what I want to say is that this is not a complex problem because Australia, with the same population as Sri Lanka, 18 million, but much larger space and resources, does it. But we don't have to look to countries that seem developed, whether it's Georgia, Guatemala, Indonesia, Philippines, Romania, South Africa. They all present scenario analysis. And actually, Philippines and South Africa have some of the best scenario analysis. And you can go and look them up. And it's very impressive what they do. So really, Sri Lanka should not feel that it isn't capable of doing better. I will end by talking about controls and solutions. That's my last 2 parts. I think getting the controls right, and we must commit to that, is a very important part of maybe correcting the problem and finding a more professional budgeting approach. And sources of oversight, we're dividing them into 2: institutional oversight, but also public oversight, right? Institutional oversight, we must look at how we improve the impact of that. With public oversight, we have to ask, how does the public have the data and information to provide that oversight? So the right to information bill that the government passed in the last few years is very important. But honestly, people shouldn't have to chase the information with RTIs. There should be proactive disclosure of data that allow people to understand and provide the kind of oversight that's there. So let me just, for people, because people are here from different places, to say we are all part of oversight. The Ministry of Finance is a part of oversight because they don't control all the implementation. There's a whole government, but it is the apex Ministry of Government and they can provide more oversight. The DPMM is doing some work on that, and I've listed the departments that do it within the ministry. Parliament, the Committee on Public Finance and Innovation that happened a few years ago, has proved to be a very important institutional oversight that needs to be strengthened. Of course, there's the National Audit Office that's important. Private sector chambers, we have the Director General of the Ceylon Chambers here with us. We have think tanks and academia, and we also have media. We are all a part of providing reasonable oversight to help improve budget outcomes in Sri Lanka. Of course, there are reasons or issues why institutional oversight is not working perhaps as well as it ought to. Now, the letter on the left is a national budget circular in the Ministry of Finance, number 1 of 2017, that provides a guidance for oversight. So says, and what we've highlighted is the kind of guidance it provides on getting good oversight. Action plans for expenditure proposals, disbursement plans, strategic plan for policy. Unfortunately, sometimes these circulars are not implemented. So we've tried to access information under this circular and been told either the circular was not followed or now we are told the circular is considered defunct because there's a department of project management and monitoring. So you go from pillar to post, right? You go to the Department of Project Management and Monitoring, they'll tell you, oh, there's a circular, you go ask about that, you ask about the circular, somebody will say the department. This is a problem in the Sri Lankan government in general, and that's why the last section of our presentation is about how to organize ministries and agencies, because the moment everything is fragmented, you can go from place to place and not get answers. This is, one of the things we think that should happen in controls is minimally an explanation for deviations that are in the budget. Both deviations at formulation, deviations at implementation. These are deviations in the budget presented to Parliament in various years on government expenditure on acquisition of vehicles. So you see from 2013 to 14, it goes up 94%. Then it comes down by 84%. Then 16 to 17, it goes up 7 times, 745%. Then continues to climb another 34% and another 24%. The reality is there may be good explanations. So maybe, and this is something that the Ministry of Finance has told us, we plan to buy trains and they're very expensive. And we put it in this budget line. What's surprising is that Parliament that debates the budget and approves the budget seems to be not cognizant of the enormous deviations and all the explanations. Because the ministry does not follow a procedure where deviations have to be given written explanations prior. You can, of course, go and speak to officials and try to find out, but that's a very unstable and problematic way of trying to understand what is in the budget. There should be an ability to have them explain so people understand. Agriculture sector expenditure deviations, right? You see that, this happening very regularly in very large amounts. And when we tried to find out what percentage of these are explained in the documents and reports of the government, we found that in the deviation in 2013, 94% were not explained. 95% not explained, 97% not explained, 92% not explained. So there are reports that are supposed to explain the budget and supposed to explain deviations, but actually those explanations don't exist when we go to those reports. There's another interesting problem we discovered in the budget last year. Now, again, I want to be clear that this is not finger pointing at anybody, but simply saying let's have an adult conversation about how to do budgets better. The budget used the word revised for various taxes, and these are in the budget speech itself. So annual levy for carrying on the business of betting and gaming, and these were gambling related taxes. And all 4 of these these proposals say the tax has been revised. And in fact, they also record a positive increase in revenue due to the revision of the tax. But when you take a deeper look, you discover that two of them are increases in taxes and two of them are reductions in taxes. The second one, the annual levy for carrying on the business of playing Rugino, this is the way they classify it, will be revised to 1 million, and it's revised downwards from 200 million to 1 million. The other one was that every person walking to a casino, the tax or the levy will be revised to $50. Well, it was a reduction of $100 to $50. When the ministry was asked, well, why did you perhaps record this as an increase in revenue? Their view was, well, we didn't collect it last year. Right. So you compound the disclosure on non-collection is not reported, and then it is reported as an increase due to a revision, which fundamentally I think the problem is that people are misled. Parliament itself is misled. And the ability to provide the adequate controls for people to know what is happening is significantly reduced. So reporting, so the other problem we see that's very interesting is how reporting formats and categorizations are different across different reports. So there is in fact, a Fiscal Responsibility Act that asks for reports to be presented in a certain way. Unfortunately, the way it's implemented, you can't compare mid-year reports with annual year-end reports. The government has economic formats for reporting, accounting formats for reporting. In addition, they have different ways of categorizing expenditure. They have budgets that include provincial councils and don't include provincial councils. It takes a month of Sundays to try and work that out. Even then you can't actually, without help from ministry officials. And it is certainly not something that even the Committee on Public Finance, which we've been assisting, has been able to do in a reasonable way. So on the left you see salaries, pensions, interest payments and other expenditures. On the other side, salaries, wages and employment benefits. Now this can't be compared with salaries. Other goods and services or subsidies, grants and transfers can't be compared with pensions. Interest payments can't be, may be comparable. Other recurrent expenditure can't be compared with anything else. So really these reports are become incomparable and therefore inscrutable, and therefore the problem of oversight continues. Okay. And this is what we say about actually how we've recorded. So for us, it doesn't matter whether government cooperates even on information disclosure or not. Non-cooperation is also information. Okay, so we actually track every RTI. We have a complete sophisticated system, and we can tell you to what extent government is cooperative or uncooperative on information. And this is available in our Budget Promises website, where we look at not just the implementation, but the openness of the budget. Now, just to help you understand why it is so important to have public oversight, whenever we have in any government, any population, any society has a principal-agent problem. That is that the principal is the society or the public, the agent is the politician, the bureaucrat who manages the finance for you. So if the principal has to have a way of holding the agent accountable to behaving well or properly or reasonably. Now, when you're a public listed company, you have the same problem, right? The managers, the directors are not the owners and they have to be held accountable. So even in Sri Lanka, these are the kinds of disclosure requirements that we mandate for public listed companies, right? Now, if we just took a leaf out of that book and say if a company that is publicly listed and a much smaller staff, a much smaller organization has this level of disclosure requirements, then why can't or why shouldn't we require equivalent or even more disclosure for government? And Parliament certainly needs this if it is to have intelligent ways of analyzing and making policy and making decisions. I'm putting down 4 disclosure requirements that are worth thinking about. Estimates of expenditure arrears for at least the budget year. So often we can misrepresent, we know this in company accounts, right? You can get any profit you like if you defer expenditure or you recognize revenue early. And of course, accounting standards keep racing after you to try and fix this problem. So differing expenditure, not reporting expenditure arrears is one way to make budgets in any year look different to how they actually look. In-year fiscal reports are not issued quarterly, so it takes actually takes 8 months before you see the report, and often the horse has bolted long before you can do much analysis on them. What's interesting is that if you compare Sri Lanka, we provide none of these. Citizens' budget is really about providing a budget in an understandable way, right? That actually a budget has to be comprehensible to people. Uganda does all of them. Okay, and one of the things I'm fascinated about when looking at Sri Lanka is how over the years we have thought we are better. African nations are underdeveloped, we are superior. South Asia is underdeveloped, we are superior. But on most global indicators that are looking at performance of bureaucracy or performance along certain metrics of efficiency, we are looking like the weaker child in South Asia. And many African countries are overtaking Sri Lanka as well. And they're overtaking because Uganda didn't start ahead, right? So there are global institutions that track this kind of budget reporting. Sri Lanka was ahead all the way up to 2010, then Sri Lanka declines, and Uganda actually keeps improving. Okay, solutions. Let me end with solutions because I think, I want you to understand everything I've said as motivation for the idea that we must solve it, and some of the solutions are inherent in the problems I highlighted. So better formulation, better controls, we think will lead to better implementation, a more effective, efficient delivery and utilization of promises and utilization of public funds, and a credible and professional budget is the outcome that we want. And Sri Lanka is not going to proceed on the developmental path without trying to get there. I think we have often asked, there's a budget, there are sometimes 196 budget proposals, does any one of them have even a 3-page analysis that tells you why this proposal, that the calculations, what are the assumptions, what are the estimates, is there a sensitivity analysis, is the project feasible, is there a risk mitigation strategy? Actually, forget the 3 on the right, even the first one is missing. There is no piece of paper that the Ministry of Finance owns. So interest groups, of course, lobby, present documents, present papers, ask for things to be put in the budget. The Ministry of Finance doesn't have its ability to, or the discipline, or the system in place to analyze and say, this proposal we have analyzed, we think it is right for these reasons, these are our assumptions, this is how we think it'll play out, right? And you can remember famous issues of budget proposals having to be reversed because the basic assumptions and the numbers on which they were formulated turned out to be incorrect. But that happens every year in ways that are not very visible. So basically, number one, if there is a proposal, there is a document, it shouldn't have to be chased with RTI. It should be publicly available. Every parliamentarian should have access to it. That says, this is the analysis that justifies this proposal. That's basic. I never approve anything at a company board without a board paper that tells me why I should approve. And even then I question it and say, have you got the legal clearance? Have you got the other clearance? And people rewrite board papers because, it is basic that you are not asked to approve things that don't have an analytical foundation or basis behind them. Number 2, enhancing information disclosure. So the moment information is concealed or not available, it becomes much easier, or it is much, it's easy to become, not take this problem seriously, correct? So I think fundamentally, there has to be proactive disclosure on information. There has to be a sensitivity analysis on the macro assumptions that are presented, because often budgets are justified on the basis of inflation targets, on the basis of growth targets, and these have to be there, and sensitivity analysis has to be there. But we need consistent formats followed in disclosure and significant deviations explained, as we say on the right-hand side, or it doesn't make sense. If there's no discipline or no requirement to explain deviations, then people can't, whenever somebody criticizes, if the minister says, oh, I have a reason, I'm buying trains, that's why it's 700 times higher. It's an impossible scenario. the explanations of deviations have to be there, and they have to be publicly available, and that's there. Third, I think we can all agree that the discretionary budget, if it has to be there, should be limited to at least not more than 2% of the budget. That's also a large number, but there should be a negative list. Currently, what happens is vehicles for ministries and politicians are bought off this discretionary budget. So it's very unpopular to tell people that you have a large budget for vehicles. You put the money in the discretionary budget and later you buy vehicles. And every time government changes, every time ministries change, every time provincial councils change, Sri Lanka spends an amazing amount of unnecessary cash on vehicles. And what's surprising is when the Committee on Public Finance asked for an asset analysis on vehicles, it turned out to be not available. There was no central place in which the vehicles purchased, their conditions, vehicles that were discarded, or the need of vehicles was being analyzed and understood. This is probably the biggest asset. There are land assets that are bigger. But one of the fundamentally large assets and costly assets, of course, the last governments put that in place or started. So now there is a database, and there's attempts to get that to work better and do better. So these are improvements that have been slowly made, but still they're not public. We don't know. I mean, public should know how many vehicles they bought with their money over what period of time, and where those vehicles are, and whom they're serving and what they're doing. So this data needs to be made public, and then we should probably put it on a negative list. If you need vehicles, you need to plan in advance. We can't be buying them off a discretionary budget. I think that's number 3. One of the issues I think is perhaps we don't have enough time to get the budget done properly. So if you ask the ministry, why do you function this way? They will say, hey, we have to do draft estimates, and that has to come 3 months in advance. The politicians decide what's going to be the budget 2 months in advance. How are we to give you that information early? We've got to work around. So really, Philippines has a 7-month cycle, Thailand has a 5-month cycle, both for formulation and for approval. So most countries spend a year doing budgets. I mean, other more developed countries spend longer even. So really, Sri Lanka needs to stop thinking that you can formulate a budget in 1 month or 2 months, give a longer cycle to get it done properly, because I don't think the bureaucrats can function on the timelines that exist to deliver a reasonably formulated budget, and that needs to change. I think what we've discovered working with the Committee on Public Finance is that actually parliamentary oversight matters a lot, but honestly, Verite doesn't want to have to always assist parliamentary oversight committees all the time. It's fine to do it for a few years. Parliament should have its own budget office, right? And this is something I think is in the pipeline. There's a draft legislation. It is valuable to take that forward, because parliamentarians, just like they have a library, they need to, in most developed countries, there's enormous number of staff helping parliament to understand finance. What else? It's fundamentally the most important thing parliament does is to manage finance. And without a budget office, you can't go to the person you're holding accountable and ask them for information to hold them accountable. That doesn't work. So in companies, we have RPT committees, related party committees, we have audit committees. These are, and we have separate experts that report to them, consultants. So Parliament needs its own way, I think, to analyze that. And really, the surprising thing is that, Uganda has a parliamentary budget office. It didn't come, by the way, from government. Government, generally, when you're in government, you resist accountability and oversight. It was an independent member's bill to bring a parliamentary budget office that got social and popular support in Uganda that actually passed it. So anyone here who's in parliament can determine that they can initiate this. You don't have to wait for government. And if there's public support, sometimes government has to also accede. So there are many countries that actually look at that and have instituted that, and that has helped enormously. So I've probably spoken for more than my time. Let me pause to take questions and invite Subhashini Abesinghe, Research Director of Verite, and Desha Dimel, who's also Research Director at Verite, to maybe come up and let's take questions for 15 minutes. also, when Natasha stops us, and we'll continue to the second part of the presentation. Yeah. Don't everybody ask at once. So there's mics roaming around, so you can just simply.
So you mentioned that interest payments are understated, and now we have an Active Liability Management Act. So the purpose of the Active Liability Management Act is to ensure that if there is surprise payment to be made, you get more, you borrow more. But from what you are saying, does it seem that the Active Liability Management Act was brought in to account for this understatement of interest?
The purpose of the Active Liability Management Act is actually to not necessarily to deal with surprise payments, but to be able to plan ahead and to manage your finances in a more efficient way. So, for instance, prior to the new legislation, you could only have borrowing limit for the next year. Whereas you might be having, for instance, high levels of repayments coming up or bunching up in a couple of years further down the line. And that piece of legislation allows you to plan in advance for that. So you at a time, for instance, when say global rates might be low, you might want to have a little bit more picked up and kept away so that you can meet those payments at a different time. So I think it's a slightly different issue that is being addressed by the
Interest payments never come by surprise. They're always known in advance, and Active Liability Management Act is a smoothing device, so that you don't have short-term planning and collection to pay. Let's take 2 or 3 questions and answer them together. If the mic can pass around, please raise your hand if you have any questions.
You said about this collection of debt, the collection of a tax and how poor it is and the differences and the shortages. Any idea you can tell about when we compare with a country like India or Bangladesh, or the average, if you look at in the South Asia, where we are standing?
We'll take a couple of more questions. Thanks for that. Yeah.
Well, it was with interest that I looked at your solutions, but I guess I'm playing devil's advocate here. How do you balance the expectations of the electorate, particularly now that they're getting into an election, and with all what you say, I mean, isn't it a challenge?
Sure, the political damage, yeah. Maybe some of you all can also just say who you are or where you're from when you ask the question. That'll help the rest of the audience also. We'll come back to you maybe. I think I haven't met you before. Yeah.
I'm Rama.
Sorry, Rama. I just don't recognize you. I expect a concern. We'll take one more question, right? Yeah. Anila.
Anila formerly of the central bank. See, a lot of these things will work if there's enough pressure put on the players. And you spoke about the lack of, information availability, etc., etc. But there is a lot of information already out there, and unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be that much interest either among the public or even among the politicians to really look at these issues seriously. So and unless that pressure comes, for example, I was on a committee once, we tried to put information from the Treasury on the annual revenue expenditure data out there. It was out there, the committee disbanded, and it was no longer there. We asked Treasury people what happened. Now there's no pressure from the public or either the private sector or the average citizen asking for this information. So if the information is not used, either it gets forgotten about or it never improves. So, and the same thing, and the Committee on Public Finance, I know they do a great job, but how many politicians in Parliament actually bother to read the report, bother to debate it in a serious manner? So we have this problem. How can we address that? Because however much the authorities, whether it's the Committee on Public Finance or the Treasury puts all these things in place, unless there is pressure coming from the private sector, from the average citizen, from the opposition, on government, these things are not going to work because there's not enough interest to force the players to conduct themselves in a professional manner. How can that be addressed?
Krishna, you would like to take the first question and to any extent you want to respond to the two and Subhash.
Sure. South Asia typically does quite poorly with regard to revenue as a percentage of GDP, but Sri Lanka has actually in the past been a lot higher than we are today. And also if you take a global median, so in 2018 Sri Lanka's tax to GDP was 13.4%. Global median was around 26-27%. So they are less than half the global median. And really, what we have seen is that both our revenue to GDP has been coming down, and also our expenditure to GDP has been coming down. Our expenditure as well, about 18.4% in 2018. Again, global median is around 30. So we are significantly going to fall short on both of those. But really, the crux of the problem is how far back we are on the revenue side.
I think actually the question of Raman and Nabila are related to some extent, because what you're asking is the political cycles of budget and how the politicians being compelled in some extent to meet unrealistic public expectations is very much linked to public demand for right information, right analysis, and right action. So some of the solutions we proposed is actually that discretion which is available to the politicians needs to also be limited, because at the end of the day it is in the public interest to limit misusing public funds. The ability of politicians to misuse public funds during election times. And then the last one is about the creating public demand. I think one of the problems that we've identified is throughout is the public's awareness about public finance and the related issues and the impact of taxation and the impact of public certain policies. So there is a low level of understanding. So there is actually an enormous, that also gives, we should be educating the public. So one of the things I think Verite takes very seriously is to how can we make public finance information easy, how can we improve access, but also make it digestible and make it easy to understand. So I think there is a requirement to create awareness.
So I think, there are academics here, there are people from other think tanks. I want to say we all have a role to play in providing or assimilating the information. Verite really hates having to be the bad guy all the time, speaking unpleasant truths. That you'd like other people to be able to actually contribute significantly. And there's a role there, but the media has an enormously important role as well. Because the work we do, the analysis we do, we are building a public finance platform to make public finance more comprehensible, but the media is part of educating society. So I think journalists and media, and I think we are trying to now set up a training for media also on economics, because if the media is unable to translate that information and all they do is simply repeat what different people say without analysis or fact-checking, which is why we do fact-checking also, then the scope for public misunderstanding is great. But I don't think the chambers should think that they don't have a role to play. This is a collective responsibility. And I think we must all say that if people are misinformed and therefore ask for things that are harmful, then we all share in that responsibility for that failure. This is why our efforts are more into public understanding than into, say, capacity building into bureaucracy. Because without public understanding, nothing works. And that's where we put our energy. I'll take perhaps one more burning question before I ask Subhashini to do a presentation. There's one or two questions. Let's take one at the back. And if there's one more, I will take it. Yeah.
Does the current government have to follow the budget of the previous government or pass a new budget in parliament to spend/raise money differently?
Is there any other burning question that I can combine with that? And after that, we will move on to the second. We'll have more time for questions after the next presentation. It should be quite short. Yeah.
Okay, Desha, maybe you can answer that question and we can.
Not very clear on that. I mean, so what was done by the previous government in November, instead of passing a full year budget, was to pass a vote on account that covers between January and April. So up till April, the incumbent present government will have to manage using that expenditure and that revenue plan. But beyond April, there will have to be a new budget or an extension of the voting account, which could also be done.
Thank you. So let me invite
Subhashini to kind of give a shorter presentation, because part of the problems in getting budgeting right and implementation right is that we change the way we manage government quite regularly. We change ministries, we change, why don't you take it from me? We change in the allocation of agencies. So Subhashini is just going to motivate us to think better about that, because they're going into an election. There is another cycle in which ministries will be formulated, and I think starting to think intelligently about it can be helpful to all of us.
So we are at a time where the entire country is quite focused on how to make the government more efficient and effective. But what we realize is actually the conversation about making government efficient and effectively has basically overly emphasized one aspect of inefficiency of the government, that is the bureaucracy. But there is another aspect of the government inefficiency that is receiving less attention. That is how important it is to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of Sri Lanka's cabinet. Now, we thought this is a good forum, since we are at a time we are getting ready for an election and we will soon have a new cabinet, and to discuss, if we are so focused on improving efficiency and effectiveness, it's important to focus on the bureaucracy, but it is equally important to focus on how we design our ministerial portfolios. So actually the problem is not new. As far back as 1988, we had a One-Singha Commission report on administration, and this is 30 years ago. And it was highlighted how proliferation of ministries, among many other things, is a significant structural defect of Sri Lanka's government. But as with most commissions, at the time of appointing them and at the time of presenting the report, there is quite a lot of attention. But frequently, we lose attention or focus about whether actual recommendations has been ever implemented. So One-Singha Commission report was also no different. And what happened is this structural defect continued, and we saw proliferation of ministries, our size of cabinet continued to grow and grow. And not only that, what we realized is that not only the number of ministries increasing, but the rationality of subjects belong together under the ministries are increasingly becoming questionable. So basically, we have three problems with our ministerial, with the way we design ministries, which are significantly problematic in terms of making our government function efficiently and effectively. So the importance of the role of the cabinet and the ministers, I don't think I need to explain to anyone in this audience. They play a very important role in terms of determining how the government functions. And how is this role, their ability to deliver this role, is undermined by these three problems. One is the number, the size of our cabinet. And then the second is the frequency of changes. How frequently do we change our cabinet of ministers? And then lastly, the mismatch of subject areas. This is just a simple graph to show how large Sri Lanka's cabinet is. This is actually after the constitutional limit compared to the population of the country. And what is really important is not just the size of the cabinet, how frequently we change our cabinet. Actually, between 2010 and 2014, we changed our cabinet 10 times. And between 2015 and 2019, we issued 32 different gazettes announcing reshuffles to the cabinet. And this affects not just the public finance management, but all aspects of government. How efficiently and effectively can the government deliver its services? And then lastly, how rational is the allocation of subjects to our ministries? We have two problems. One is fragmentation. So we basically fragment related subjects across multiple ministries. The other is misalignment. Basically, we combine unrelated subjects into single ministries. Both affect the ability of the government to function efficiently and effectively. So just to give you an example of misalignment, this is one of the ministry we had recently. So look at these three subjects. What is the link between any of these functions to be under one ministry? And to make matters worse, you want not only combine unrelated subjects under one, you also split related subjects across multiple ministries. So the Ministry of City Planning and Water Supply and Higher Education also manages cities, township planning and urban development. Ministry of Megapolis and Western Development also manages city development and planning. Now this definitely has to be addressed because it seriously affects the efficiency of government. Just to give you a case study, because agriculture at every election comes to the forefront, and it is one sector everyone wants to revive. And we saw two problems in agriculture with budget. We constantly promise so much to the agriculture at the time of presenting the budget because that is where all the media attention is, but we constantly do not spend the amount we promise. And not only that, like Dishan showed, we fail to even explain the deviations. And on top of that, for agriculture, unfortunately, look at what has happened to the ministerial portfolios of agriculture in the last 10 years. This is how agriculture has been split, fragmented, combined, split, and over the years. And sometimes you should not be surprised where we are in the agriculture sector when you look at these problems. So basically, when we talk about how to make an efficient and effective government, this is an important area that is less discussed, and it is an easy area for any government that has come to power to address, cabinet of ministers. If every governments are serious about making the government efficient, they can start with themselves. So basically, if we don't, what this does is, this kind of fragmentation, frequent changes, does is it obviously increases the cost. We already have government that is inefficient. What it does is it increases the coordination and communication costs. It is impossible to make national policies. It is impossible to implement the national policies. It affects the public finance management. It reduces the efficiency and accountability of the government. Thank you.
So, we take baby steps. So we have, after much recognition of the problem, the 19th Amendment curtailed the number of ministries. But it wasn't able to actually still determine the allocation of ministries. It didn't create a management structure that can be stable and pertain over time. Most countries have a fixed structure with very little room for changes, so that departments, agencies, ministries have continuity and can work in a long-term way without being fragmented, combined, and disjointed constantly. Now, I've heard some members of parliament in this room talk about the need to do that. But I think that is perhaps one of the critical needs for Sri Lanka, to now stop playing juggle with the ministries in the country and to have a stable management system and allocation of subjects in place. So we open up to questions again. We wanted to stop at 5:30 because I know you're all busy, so we've kept it tight. There are members of parliament here who can comment. There are people from agencies that have tried to assist the government. There are also people from government. Please feel free to contribute, to ask a question, but also maybe offer more information and advice or guidance that may not have been covered during our
Yeah, we did some work, especially with Advocata. Somebody from Advocata is here. Just coming up with a list of ministries, there's no theory of cabinet making. You can't have a theory, but there's empirical methods. So you can we looked at 10 countries, US, UK, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and we find actually our cabinet making is about 15 portfolios are stable. Except for these odd ones like higher education and water, Ministry of Higher Education, highways. So there's a method, and we can develop a method, empirical method to do the ministries. There's 30 ministry limitation, but I think it's also important is to have performance measures. Is it tied with the previous person? Performance measures for ministries, rather than going down the details of agency. The budget has provisions for key performance indicators. The word is there, but not everybody gives those. So those are two things, to come up with empirical method to have a list cabinet portfolios, so that at least 15 of those are stable and agencies are tied to that. And the second one is the performance measures for militaries. If you take the last budget or previous one, Minister of Justice is one good example. They have something called case clearance rate. I mean, you don't have to worry about any other indicator. If you get ministry, you can have as many cars, as many expenditures, BMWs for the secretaries, doesn't matter. If you ask for what is the case clearance rate of this ministry. So I think 30 ministries and at least 1 to 3 key performance indicators. The provisions are in the budget, we can push for those.
Thank you, Sujata, that's helpful. Let me give one of these mics also, so that there's a question here, and let me give another mic so we can manage with one, so that you can pass it around to others here.
Nishan, being the Ceylon Chamber also studied this in quite a bit of detail. We had a National Agenda Committee on public sector reform where we had several former secretaries also joining with some of the private sector senior people. And we went actually one step further. We identified the problem. We came up with a list of ministries. We aimed to end up with 30, but you won't believe we ended up with 22. With 22, actually we were able to cover all the key areas, and we actually have shared this with the highest authorities in government, and we have had a reasonably positive response, asking us to come back with further justifications, giving some rationale for what we have proposed. I don't mind sharing it with you and having your views also.
Manjuli, would you be open to a coalition of organizations? So Sujata, Advocata, Chambers, Verite, I know Transparency's worked on it. I think it may be important to combine the knowledge and the understanding that we have. We are also doing a scoring system of fragmentation and misalignment. Because sometimes you can continue the same subject in the same ministry, but also add 5 other ministries to it. So there are some humorous videos that Verite's monthly.lk team has done just to show how funny it is, the way in which ministries have been combined or broken apart. And I think what you're saying seems to suggest that it is useful for us to join together in putting the collective.
Sure, I think we can collaborate. In fact, we had a representative from Verite also on my right who was in that committee. So we had participation, but we can share with you. And also, I mean, just to add on to the cost of doing this frequent reshuffling and combining ministries in different ways, the additional costs in terms of logistics. Every time you change a ministry, people have to relocate. The amount of expenses in relation to stationery all over again, enormous costs.
And the time cost is also probably quite significant. There's a question.
My name is Piyargam. I am from Minister of Finance. This is not a question. This is a rather comment. And we are very mindful about all the problems. And thank you very much for organizing the timely forum. We can continually put pressure on government, whatever the political party in power, to have a very accountable, transparent budget. There's no doubt about that. We also under pressure. I think my friend Desha is also aware of that. Sometimes we have no option but to listen to the politician. Real problem start with budgeting is at the time portfolio is decided. This is a nightmare. Even sometimes we are struggling in the budget department to match this provision with the portfolios. New portfolios they change. Every time, very frequently portfolios are being changed. And now, because sometimes we have been given deadline. Before that deadlines we have to finalize everything. Sometimes we can't do proper budgeting. This is something we have to take very seriously. At the same time, there are some common issues inherited in the budget process for last 25 years. If you look at, one of the issues is budget process is not professionalization. Now we have to professionalize budget process. To me, the budget in Sri Lanka is an administrative function. What they do is, now all spending agencies, they add some percentage on previous allocation and they submit, because that's the only possible budgeting they can do, right? And we are struggling with these figures unnecessarily, and there is no logic behind, there's no stories, there's no development plan sometimes, until and unless we put some budget proposal on top of that. That is the situation. And there are so many problems. I mean, it takes me to talk about years. And therefore, I think very timely, if we can put pressure, keep on pressure on political parties. At the same time, I think one lacking thing is regulatory framework for public financial management. We started that some time ago. We are at the final stage. By that time, there's government change. Again, we have to start from scratch. Again, government change. This is keep on going. But finally, unfortunately, this is something we are lacking right now. If you have a very sound, transparent public financial management framework, I mean, people can't fool you. We have to definitely bureaucracy is responsible for citizens in the country on resource allocation and development. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think the Fiscal Responsibility Act, with all its weaknesses, was a very important step. And I remember when I was at IPS in the 90s, there were people who came to me and had said this is their single goal in their career, to make this happen. So sometimes, there have been bureaucrats and others in the IMF who committed themselves clearly to understand that they can make one big important change and that will have positive outcomes. And I think improving the Fiscal Responsibility Act, there's space for that. And we are very sympathetic to the Ministry of Finance also, even though we are critical also, because we've seen both sides, right? So we work with you all in ways that you all don't know, also because we do a lot of work and analysis to help government, just as much as we also shine a light on the weaknesses of government. And we realize this is a collective problem. It's not just one ministry. The whole government needs to be more professional, but it's like having a trishaw and wanting to then get into a Maruti, and then get into a Nissan and a Toyota. You can't hang on to that trishaw engine and expect to drive, look nice in your Toyota. It doesn't work. But Sri Lanka's bureaucratic, professional system our professional system hasn't changed. Some might argue it's become a little weaker since the 1980s. So you can't get from that trishaw to the Toyota. And really, this may become the biggest constraint for the country's growth. So we have to get together and see not how you train and educate a few bureaucrats. Because in a broken system, however much you help individuals, the system will still crash. So you can't put better drivers in this thing. You can get better mechanics. You can pump more air in your tire, but the engine's a problem. You need a new engine. And public sector reform to get that engine redone, to be fit for purpose, is perhaps the most important developmental challenge we face. We are not even talking about it. Sorry, I talked to you.
You might do beyond that.
First of all, thank you for your as a member of this public finance committee for the last 5 years. I would like to make a few comments. The first thing is about this.
So we have to get together and
detailed explanations about expenditure and revenues and projects. Normally, when we not only the committees, we made a lot of oral questions. But what we get from the minister, which was prepared by, of course, by the ministry officials, are not. They are not professional reports. They are mainly to escape from the scenario, political half-truth. Especially, I have been questioning all the supplementary budgets allocations provided tabled by the Ministers of Finance for last few years. Because according to standing orders, you must provide the reasons. But when we questioned from the minister, he never answered. And I do know that even when we question from the officials of the ministry, they are also not keen to provide. For an example, we ask about the explanation about the tax cuts, how much we lost, whether it is 400 billion, 500 billion, 600 billion. Still now, they said they will provide. Still now, they haven't provided. They are theoretical and a professional explanation. Right? So, and about this pension reforms and everything. So my issue is not only the political culture of this country, the culture of the public servants also have been declined, maybe due to the this very worst type political culture. But as educated people and professionals, I think they must do something. I will tell you one example, Nishan. When one politician when he was saying in this country, Muslim population is growing heavily and almost the children under 5 years are more than 50%. Okay, and for a politician you can say anything. And with research you can publish that fact check also. But there is a department of census and studies. Then what is the duty of the director of that department? He or she must come to the media. She cannot organize a press conference. Not to come into politics. These are the facts. That should be done. But these officials, I mean, with all respect to their knowledge, very rarely with all respect to them, we rarely get. So this is common to the financial things, because financial things are more complicated than just this other issue. Last thing about this formation of cabinets and everything. I cannot say that it was the best government, but when we formed the government for 1 year, 2004 to 5, I was the Deputy Minister for Agriculture, Lands, Irrigation and Livestock, you see. Because we had an idea, we got the idea from the agriculturalists and the economists before we formed the government. We told President Chandrika, we need these 4 ministries, including these institutions. We were very firm on that. Okay, one night, she removed Mahavali authority from us, that is okay, but all relevant ministries, the departments, organizations, they were under our ministry. Right? So we ran the country for between 20 ministries. It was not some 100 years ago, it was just 15 years ago. Right? So This is mainly about, this is nothing rocket science something. This is completely the corrupt, very irresponsible political culture. I know there in the parliament, there was after 2015 elections, I know some intellectuals and professors and so many officials, they had a 3-day workshop in the parliament. I don't know that ma'am mentioned about it, but that workshop, there was a 3-day workshop. I also know they found only 22, but because they knew the political culture of this country, they scientifically they found that 22 is enough, more than enough. But they thought that when you say 22, it will not work. So they just add another 8, right, to please the politician. So it means this is about the political culture. I think it's the responsibility of the citizens. If they are, because you lastly mentioned about the engine. So without changing the engine, you just doing something and you expect some another thing. It will not work. So my final humble request is from the high officials from the finance ministry and other places, please provide the exact details. Even for the opposition people, we sometimes use some false information. You can correct us. You can correct the government also. You will not transfer to a post office. So this is my thank you.
Daniel has a question. I can add an anecdote to Bimal's and Subhashini's thing about portfolios. Sometimes because we don't have a defined structure and people do it haphazardly and hurriedly, there's a Ministry of Commerce and Industry that's entirely about local commerce and industry. There's a Department of Commerce in the country that is entirely about equipping trade and foreign embassies of the country. But we found after 2015 that the Department of Commerce was gadgeted under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry because, after all, they are both commerce. I used to have a cartoon on my door when I was teaching in Oxford that said, Iraq and Al-Qaeda, and George Bush was certainly the Q, says, see, they have something in common. It was like that. They both have commerce in common. And you can see what happens when there is no system. Because the person actually then putting it together is guessing and living and having enormous consequences for the functioning of government at the end of the day. Yeah, Daniel.
So mine's more of a comment than a question, really. And as Subhash was presenting, I was thinking, what's the incentive that's driving this fragmentation? And I would submit that it was the change of a single word in the 72 Constitution that really led to this fragmentation, or the incentive for fragmentation. And that's that the secretary to the ministry prior to 72 was subject to the general direction of the minister. After 72, it became the direction of the minister, which meant that the minister became the secretary and the secretary became the minister, because the minister then made instructions about who should be posted where, what project should be done where, so on and so forth, and then the secretary made the policies. So as a result of that, you have this urge to go and pick up a department that then has an office or a factory in a particular part of the country and so on and so forth, that leads to these very strange creatures arising. So of course it's really a constitutional question in my view over time that's led to this, and whether that can be solved in the near future is a separate question, but I think that's something to keep in mind as part of the solution.
Thank you. So I'll take a question from Iran, and if there is anybody else, just let us know, otherwise I'll call it to a close soon after maybe you respond to Iran. And Anila, okay, yeah.
Mine is a comment on actually how do you get this done in terms of limiting the number of ministries. I buy into the rationale and everything completely. Now, when we go for the solution, we generally look at an individual, and then we run to the individual, and then we try to sell it to the individual, and the individual brings down the ministries from 50 to 25 or whatever. That just won't work, because you can be sure that another member of the same family will increase the 25 to 50 in a few years from now. So this is really the history of Sri Lanka. So I think that second best solutions, right? I think in terms of putting this rationale, once you have decided whether it's 20 or 22 or whatever, actually should be cast in stone. It doesn't matter what government, what leader, it should be in the constitution. These are second best. It's like having a quota for women in local government. It's the second best, but it's necessary at this stage. Otherwise we have 2% instead of 25%. So we need to, I think, move across and lobby and build public opinion and actually get it in that way, and I think it will work for a while. And then I would look at from a management point of view and say, whatever that number is, 20 or 25, they have actually permanent officers. I take the constitutional point that was just made now, it's a very valuable point. And then you have permanent officers, so you know at which corner which ministry is, and that's there permanently. Ministers will come and go. These are little details, but how you get it done. Then it was referred that, the stationery changes and costs go up and all. I received a letter from the Finance Minister of Singapore a few months ago. The first thing I noticed is that it was just the Finance Minister of Singapore. When he signed off, he just put his name and said Finance Minister. So stationery doesn't change. You see, so when you start thinking about how they have built the institutions, people come and go, but the institutions are there, so the costs are all very much there. And I'll just close with this little anecdotal story. I go and I'm sworn in, right at the beginning as Deputy Minister of Investment Promotion and Highways. And then I come into my office, the story gets better. I come into my office and about 2 weeks later, the secretary comes up to me and says, "Sir, is this okay? This is your letterhead, this is your card." So before they print it, they're showing me that copy. I look at it and it says Deputy Minister of Investment Promotion, Highways and Higher Education. And I scream at her and says, "How can this be? How can you get this so wrong?" She looks at me, very puzzled. She goes and she brings a gazette and she puts it in front of me and says, "You're wrong." I just said that anecdotal story to show what a mess the management system in this country is in.
Is there anyone else who wants to come in after Anila? Or Anila, you will have the last. Okay, one other person and then we'll close absolutely, right?
One comment and then a request. The first one is in the light of what Manjula said, and you're trying to work together, given that there are media people here, and I hope it's both print and electronic, would it be possible? First of all, congratulations on 2 really good presentations. The way this has been presented, what we all know about this nonsensical situation of the ministries, is there any way that you can get the media, the chambers, everybody involved to really give this publicity, to raise public awareness so that the actual sad situation is out there in black and white at a very crucial point in time, so that people start talking about it, it generates some interest, and hopefully it will have an impact on whoever comes into power. That's one. The second thing is, this has been done so effectively. You see, we've spoken about the ministries, but actually the public sector in the country also suffers from the same thing. If I'm correct, the last survey of semi-government and government has 1,300 entities. So there is a a department of X and a department of X plus Y, all overlapping, and it's a huge problem. So is there a way that maybe Verite or a group could actually look at how the public, and there's also this habit in Sri Lanka that if entity A doesn't work, you create another entity that does the same work. You find it difficult to find people to run it, but then, there's all kinds of overlap and it's as big a mess as the ministries. So is it possible also to do a study of that and bring that also into the public domain, so that this question of jobs in the public sector, you all the time read agriculture. I need half an hour to talk about agriculture, what's happening out there in the field. There's the Department of Agrarian Services, there's the Agriculture Department, there's all these extension officers overlapping. It's a huge mess, no wonder the sector hasn't been grown. So is it possible to do a similar study of the public departments and agencies that are overlapping and covering these areas, so that even that comes into the public domain in a big way and generates discussion, so that then those who make the decisions will look at it a little more carefully. And one other point, this again an anecdote, some years ago when I was still working in the centre, that I was talking to a senior person, a new government had come in, and I said, how on earth did this department, it's a huge department, very important, I don't want to mention, how on earth did this department come under this ministry? And the guy looked at me and said, oh, you know, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, we were very tired, so we just chucked it there. These are the people who made the decision about how to divide the government entities under ministries. So you can see there's no shadow cabinet, there's no planning of people when they're in opposition of what they're going to do if they get into government to decide. So there are all these issues that may need to be taken up by Verite and other entities, you know, to address some of these things and, you know, put pressure on those who are having to make the decisions to perform more professionally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Very helpful thoughts for research. Dhananath is about to volunteer to do all that research through Advocata. Dhananath, you have the last word before I thank people. Yeah.
Thank you, Nishan. Dhananath from Advocata. Thank you, Subhashini and Nishan, for the insightful presentation. Isn't that the bigger problem is the size of the government? Because I quote Deshal on one of his lectures, he cracked a joke on what's wrong with Sri Lankan economy. He started, his friend asked, Deshal, what are you going to say? You need not to spend like half an hour. If you get the cabinet, if you get a photograph of cabinet, that's what's wrong with Sri Lankan economy. And Deshal had said, they are not fitting into one's frame. I think what we are trying to do is, now we are trying to expand the frame to capture them, because now they are too big. Like we have like a small pond, we are like a small airfield tire tube would be enough, but now we have like a Rolls-Royce engine and we are trying to fit the Rolls-Royce engine to this like small pond, and we are having like more controls, getting an audit on the vehicles and everything. Isn't that, and I know it's a difficult, politically it's not popular, and every government wants want to recruit more people and expand the government, but isn't that like a bigger problem, and aren't we trapped on that bigger problem, and now we are trying to identify solutions on like micro issues is my question.
Thank you. So let me call it to a close this way. I think we are clear that there are some very important problems, and if we start with Subhashini's presentation that Dhananath's reflecting in a different way, both the size of cabinet portfolios, and when we limit the size, the irrationality with which the departments, agencies, functions, subjects are organized is a significant impediment to getting management, country, policy, and success right. However, quite apart from that, we have a very serious challenge and then the public officials also have that challenge of how do you function more professionally within whatever system there is, and we have focused on the budget. We have provided 5 solutions for you to think about, because we think actually, you know, sometimes you have to do the second best, third best. We want the first step, right? And there are 5 things we can do quickly, immediately, which is what we presented in terms of information disclosure, discretionary budget, in terms of just having an analysis of what of every proposal that is in the budget. So I think what we want to, because sometimes when you ask for very big changes, very difficult things, that things take a long time, people get discouraged, and so we wanted to present 5 practical things that we want to advocate to the officials here and anybody else in Parliament, you know, speaking up to say these are things that can be done next month. They don't require legislation, they require just simple behavioral change, and we can get going. But there is, I think, as we've been reminded by lots of people, a larger task of actually entrenching within the constitution, within the law, and also structurally changing the engine and changing the public sector. I want to thank all of you who have come, but I also want you all to pause a little to thank the people behind this analysis for Verite. And I'm going to just ask Verite, Subhashini, myself, Nishar may sit here, but you'll be surprised at the amazing work done by young people at Verite who are in their 20s, who come out of university, are passionate about seeing change in the country. And so I invite maybe some of them to stand up. Let's give them a round of applause. For all your future budget analysis, please don't try to rub them into government. That has happened as well. Daniel is not anymore at Verite, he's too busy helping the ministry. So thank you all for being here. And thank you for all the contribution that you've made. My hope is that you will take what we heard and discussed here and try to give effect to that, both in public advocacy, in the conversations that you have. Sometimes it's our gossiping that is more powerful than we think. So at cocktail parties, at events, when you bump into politicians, the president, that kind of gossiping is more powerful than we think. And I think when we change the conversation in the country, change will come. And we trust that all of you will become part of that change. Thank you very much. Thank you.